From the NewsChannel 5 Network, this is Open Line.
Left. Will you shut up, man?
Listen, let me ask my question.
Well, I'll ask Joe.
The
individual mandate was the most unpopular aspect of Obamacare. With you,
go ahead. Wait a minute. You get the final word, Mr.
Well, it's hard to get any word in with this clown. Excuse me.
Hey, let me just say it.
No. I'm Mr. President.
$3.5 million, Joe.
He wants to get rid of the Affordable Care Act.
What is the Trump health care plan?
Right. Well, first of all, I guess I'm debating you, not him. Would you like me to condemn
white supremacists and right
Proud Boys? Stand back and stand by. But I'll tell you what. Somebody's got to do something about Antifa and the left.
You're the worst president America has ever had.
Hey, Joe, let me just tell you, Joe. I've done more in 47 months. I've done more than you've done in 47 years, Joe.
Wow. So there's some clips from last night. It happened about 24 hours ago. It is certainly what people have talked about all day long, and that's what we are talking about tonight on Open Line. Last night's presidential debate, and it was something else. We are very happy to have with us a Vanderbilt Political Science Professor, Dr. Thomas Schwartz. He is joining us as all of our guests do via Zoom. So thank you, Dr. Schwartz. There you are. From your home. You're usually beside me, but now you're at your house.
Yeah.
So thank you for being here. All right, you just saw that clip.
Thank you for having me on the program.
Oh yeah, you just saw that clip. I'm sure you watched last night. I'll be interested to hear from people as they call in what their thoughts were, and I encourage people to call in with their thoughts. But Dr. Schwartz, your thoughts. What did you think of last night?
Well, it was the most unusual, distinctive presidential debate that I've ever seen. I've been watching presidential debates live since 1976 when Jimmy Carter and Gerald Ford debated, and during that first debate, the power went out of their mics and they just stood there for almost 20 minutes, silent, just staring ahead. In the past, debates were criticized as press conferences, really not allowing any interchange. The Commission on Debates decided to allow more of that. But what they got with President Trump was a series of interruptions and complete chaos. The transcript probably reads people talking over each other constantly. It was, in many respects, an embarrassment to the United States. This is a dignified tradition. It ended up looking pretty much like a world wrestling match more than a presidential debate.
There's been some discussion about whether there should be changes to the rules, and even if the Presidential Commission on Debates, the Commission on Debates, has the authority to change the rules at this point. What do you understand?
Well, yes, they're considering it. One of the simplest things is to turn off the mic of those who are not allowed to talk during certain times, and that would have obviously cut off some of the interruptions last night. But I think the problem there is that the candidates could decide they don't like that particular change, or in this case, President Trump's group may not want to do that. And there is the idea that they're changing the rules that had been negotiated and decided on earlier. But it does look like they're going to try to change the behaviors and at least have a different type of debate for the next one, which is the town hall format, and which might be very different because citizens will be asking the questions rather than reporters.
I think that will be very interesting to see them interact with citizens as opposed to reporters. There's so much to unpack here, but can anyone determine a winner? How would you go about even doing that last night?
Well, I think the thing that does happen is, of course, there are these immediate polls taken as to people's preferences. My own sense is that there's not a real winner. It probably tended to simply reinforce partisans on both sides. A real winner could be found as if you had a genuine number of undecided voters and tried to get some assessment from that. And some of those have been done, and on smaller levels, and you do get some reading from that. But it's hard to get a real winner in any sort of a debate like that.
I remember, I've watched several debates. I remember Al Gore getting in trouble back in 2000 because he sighed. He was sighing,
yes,
I guess repeatedly. And so to think back to that is what got Al Gore in so much trouble back in 2000 to where we are now is kind of astounding.
Yes, and it's an amazing. I remember exactly what you're referring to, and in the next debate, Al Gore was deliberately super polite to George Bush, and that ended up costing him some of his supporters saying you were too polite to him. You didn't, and so I doubt that President Trump is going to react the same way. But there is this sort of notion that a candidate might overcompensate. And to a certain extent, that's happened in past debates. I don't think you're going to see that here. Although I think in the town hall format, President Trump has to be more careful on how he interacts with citizens, and as does Joe Biden as well.
And you study political science, and we're going to start taking calls here. We have a bunch of calls. I want to let people call in, but your assessment of our democracy based on what you saw last night, and some of the answers, especially to that final group of questions about will both sides be willing to say that they lost, if will they accept the results, and the whole notion of the ballots. I mean, how concerned are you for the state of our democracy after having watched some of that last night?
Well, I think we can tend to overly panic on something like this. I think this is a product of the specific conditions of the pandemic and some of the other questions coming up. I'm on this question, I'm not as pessimistic as many of my colleagues and others who have sort of painted rather dire scenarios. I actually think we'll be surprised by how Election Day goes, and I think we may not have a winner on election night, but we'll have a pretty clear idea where that's going. And I'm not as panicked on the state of our democracy. I think it's clear that we have lost something of the norms of political discourse and other things that used to be much more accepted and established. And that's regrettable on a lot of levels. But on the other hand, I don't think we're in danger of any sort of loss of that democracy. Okay,
that's great. Well, that is good, because there has been all kinds of talk about that today. So I'm really glad to hear you say that. Let's start taking calls. We have a number of calls here. Let's go to Linda. Hello, Linda.
Did you say Linda?
Yes, ma'am. What did you think of the debate last night?
Oh, it was a circus. Unreal. I have a few things I'd like to bring up, but I'll be fast, I promise.
Okay, go ahead.
I would like to ask the professor what he thinks about, of course, the Trump remark, stand back, stand by, and also having poll watchers. I mean, that's ridiculous. And also his lie, one of many lies, about the sheriff in Portland, he said was supporting him. Well, the sheriff gave an interview with someone today and said he did not support him and never would. And also, the thing about Trump bringing up Biden's son, he has no room to do that. His spastic son, Don Jr., is clearly on cocaine. I mean, you can tell that by any interview he does and the way he and his screaming girlfriend acted during the convention. So,
okay.
Anyway, I got it all in.
You got all those in. All right, well, let's, Professor, what do you think? The first one is stand back, stand by. That has gotten a lot of attention today. I think we have a clip we'll play a little later of that moment. But what did you think of that?
I thought it was very regrettable that the president didn't take the opportunity to just say, I condemn white supremacists. That would have been a very simple thing to say. I think he should have said that. Donald Trump, when he gets cornered, loves to engage in this sort of behavior of, he doesn't like to ever criticize people who support him, even if they're reprehensible people. And there's a narcissism there about Trump, and we know that. I mean, that's the least surprising thing you could say about Donald Trump. I'm not, I think, his record on some of these issues has gone back and forth. I mean, he's not an anti-Semite. I don't think. I think he said horribly regrettable things on racism, but I would not call him a racist in the manner that's been used. But it's still regrettable that he didn't take that opportunity. But that is Donald Trump, and that is sort of what you get with him. And I think it stems more from this personal self-regard he has about supporters than it does from any real affinity for what they stand for.
What about this call for there to be poll watchers, his supporters being poll watchers?
Yeah, I think that's again regrettable. Yeah, it's a part of his own very I think terrible decision to try and cast doubt on the election beforehand. Of course, he did the same thing in 2016. He didn't do it quite as explicitly, but he did some of the same thing when he said he wouldn't accept the results then. So I think this is not terrifically surprising, even if in this context it does take on, I think, a more threatening tone to it.
It seemed to be, and I'm interested in your take on this, that he may be trying to set up a situation where he would say the results are invalid, this election was chaotic, the ballots are inappropriate, it's a scam, and he wants the Supreme Court to make some decision that would basically be the final decision that would maybe keep him in office. Do you get that? And where do you think we are with that?
I mean, this is actually one of the things I always get. I think people always think Donald Trump is scheming in some ways. Sometimes I think he's simply throwing out things and see what hits the wall and what sticks. And that there's not any great sort of central intelligence behind all of it. And I think in this case, sometimes he's free associating, as when he starts talking about mail-in ballots and talks about a case in Pennsylvania and then starts talking about ballots being thrown in the river and all of these things. So I'm not so sure that there's any calculated plan. If the election is really close, you could see some of this resurfacing. I'm beginning to think, though, that Trump is going to so poison the atmosphere that he's going to end up being faced with a landslide against him, in which case he'd have very little alternative but to leave office.
Is there a political science sort of rationale for getting people to be so turned off by the process, I guess lowering turnout? I mean, is that a viable political strategy to just make people so kind of disappointed and disgusted with the whole process that they don't vote?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean that may, if there is any genius to what Trump is doing, the idea of making the process look bad, because in part Donald Trump won in 2016 because a lot of Democrats didn't show up, and if he could turn down turnout on the part of Democrats and keep it up on the part of his base, he would be hoping to recreate that situation. Remember, his win in 2016 was a very, very narrow win, 77,000 votes in 3 states. So, yeah, discouraging people from voting, tainting the process, making Joe Biden look, or trying to separate Biden from the progressive Democrats by constantly sort of trying to push him on those sorts of issues. All of that may be designed to at least try to suppress Democratic turnout.
And the last thing that Linda asked about, then we'll move on, the Portland sheriff, that's true. We saw some back and forth on that. Then there was a big debate about sons, specifically Biden's son. What about that moment? And it was kind of expected. Certainly Hunter Biden has been somebody that Donald Trump's been very concerned about. He's been in the news. How do you think that played, and what do you think about that whole back and forth?
Well, I think Trump was looking for an opportunity to bring it up. It is one of the things that he is hoping to accentuate the idea that Hunter Biden, that Joe Biden's a part of the corrupt Washington establishment, helped his son get all sorts of opportunities in China, helped his son get an opportunity in Russia, which of course also tends to move away from the criticism that he's received for his own efforts on Russia and Ukraine. So it's part of a strategy. It got very ugly last night because Joe Biden started with the issue of what had happened to his son who had passed away or had died, Beau Biden, and then Trump tried to turn it around to Hunter, and it just got very ugly. And I think Joe Biden probably was tempted perhaps to say something about one of Trump's sons, but seemed to have restrained himself from saying that, although he sort of hinted at that Trump's family was also sort of engaging in corruption. So that was an particularly ugly part of the debate.
Yes, it was. Let's go back to more calls here. Let's go to Marilyn. Hello, Marilyn.
Yes.
Hi. What's on your mind? What did you think of the debate?
Oh, I was so saddened and disappointed and frustrated all at the same time. This is so un-American for us as Americans to kind of accept this from our political leaders. I mean, he's the president of the United States, and for him to act like this, I don't know how anybody can defend his behavior. And for us to say, well, you know, that's Trump, and that's almost like starting to kind of lean toward accepting kind of what he's doing, or almost like, well, what can we do about it because that's the way he is. That goes to me almost like we're leading toward a dictatorship. And I believe that's really where he's trying to take us as a country, to where he is the dictator in chief and not the president of the United States.
All right.
It's sickening. It's sickening.
Marilyn, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Others feel that way. That is the concern from a lot of people, I guess more on the left, that we're moving toward a dictatorship. That's where Donald Trump wants to take this. We have a resilient democracy. You are a political science professor. When you hear those concerns, what do you say?
Well, I understand the concern. Donald Trump frequently acts in ways that sound very authoritarian, saying I fixed it, I did this, in ways that have an echo of sort of strongman's behavior. But if you actually look at what's happened during the Trump years, he's faced resistance on every count. The democracy has not declined. He talks a good game, but in the end, he has to back down from many of the things he says he's going to do, shut down the country, suddenly finding he doesn't have that authority, or claiming that he's going to do something and then suddenly he can't. I think there's a lot of a blowhard in Trump and a tendency to exaggerate. And that, I think it scares people in some ways, but it's also, I think you have to step back and look at what actually has happened. And I don't see a dictatorship in the same way that many others do. But I also realize his rhetoric has been very polarizing, and it certainly is the sort of thing that worries people. But I don't see it actually happening in terms of the institutions or in terms of what's actually happening in government.
Right. Okay. All right. Again, that's good to hear. Let's go to Ann. Hello, Ann.
Yes. What worried me about last night was when the president made the comment that he had given the power to our governors to go outside the country and purchase medicines for individual states. And as someone who has dealt with illness for 50 of her 63 years, I don't want my governor, a mini Trump, to be purchasing the drugs that I survive on. And if that doesn't wake up an American and drag me to a poll to vote someone else into office, that one comment alone will get me to the polls on November 3rd, because everybody, if nothing else, that one remark that came out of Trump's mouth last night needs to wake up every American, because the FDA needs to be approving our medicines.
Okay.
Not our governor, not our president, but the FDA.
All right.
And that one statement last night was enough to keep me listening to CNN and any other person that was giving their opinion of what took place last night. And if we have to put a shock collar on someone to take their 2 minutes and give it fairly to each individual, then that's what we need to do.
Okay, all right, Ann, thank you. Okay, so yeah, Ann very disappointed that clearly wants people to follow the rules, 2 minutes to speak, but spent a lot of time there talking about an answer to health care. That was one of the early answers, and it's kind of one where they actually both got to say a few words. It was really after that things just totally fell apart. It kind of fell apart from the beginning, but there were some coherent words back and forth about health care. Is that your thought on that, or what did you think? Well,
you know, the intriguing thing is, of course, that a lot of Americans actually do try and buy their medications in Canada. There is, I mean, this idea that the FDA approve, I can understand her point of view, but in fact, one of the options of trying to reduce the costs of prescription drugs is to go outside of the country. That's what Trump was actually talking about. Yes, there are dangers connected to that, certainly, but the idea is to escape some of the high prices by going to other countries that don't have or that have much cheaper medicines as a way of reducing the costs. And that was what Trump was talking about. Trump, that was in the context of the idea of whether Trump had any sort of medical plan, because Biden was, of course, arguing that he was going to abolish Obamacare and without any plan to replace it. And then Trump threw out this idea that he's letting governors buy drugs outside as a way of reducing the cost of prescription drugs. But I can see why she's upset, but it's also partly this argument about how do you reduce costs.
Why don't we take Michael? Michael, what's on your mind?
Okay, well, I want to say good afternoon to y'all. And I'm 62 years old. I'll be 63 this coming year. I never seen anything like this president in my entire life. I mean, it's disgusting. I was raised up to vote for Democrat all my life. Now, I had got in a situation when I was young that where now I can't vote. They won't allow me to vote. But I'm telling y'all, I can see clear through this president. He's about the worst president I ever seen in my entire life. I suffer with high blood pressure. I'm a diabetic, and it's just miserable seeing him in the office. I mean, he's like a immature child. His mind works that way. And furthermore, he's taking people here in Nashville through pain and suffering, and I mean, be honest with you, he's taking everybody through hell is the word.
Okay.
Because other countries done got stimulus checks for like $2,000 or more, and they're getting it every 6 months. So
during the pandemic. All right, I'm gonna cut you off because we gotta move on. But there's more. So the first four callers all very upset with what they saw last night, and all very upset, frankly, with President Trump and his demeanor. All right, we're going to take a break, and then we'll come back, take more calls, because we have a bunch of calls. So others on the line, just hold on. It's interesting to hear everyone's thoughts. There are a couple lines open if you want to call them. There's the number, 615-737-PLUS, 615-737-7587. We'll take a break. Be back right after this.
Vice President, no.
Can I be honest? It's a very important question.
Try to be honest.
He stood up.
No, the answer to the question is no.
Ukraine.
No, sir.
With $1 billion, if you
that
get rid
is
of
absolutely not true.
You're doing it.
You're going to have
true.
Gentlemen. I hate to raise my voice, but it seems to be, why shouldn't I be different than the two of you?